General Electric, one of the nation's most well-known industrial groups, is facing a drastic retreat. Several plants are slated for closure, thousands of jobs are being cut, and parts of production are being moved abroad. The primary reason is the sharp rise in costs for steel, aluminum, and other raw materials following the new tariff policies. Yet the General Electric case might only be the start of a much larger crisis. Famous companies in the steel industry, vehicle manufacturing, and logistics are already scaling back production. In several U.S. states, factories are sitting idle, shifts are being canceled, and entire towns are fearing for their economic future. Which seven industrial giants are particularly affected, and why could this development also hit Europe? The most crucial details follow in our report. One General Electric, an industrial legend, leaves America. General Electric was more than just a company. Over generations, this name stood for American ingenuity, stable jobs, and the belief that the industrial power of the U.S. would never falter. But that very symbol is now starting to break apart. In plants from Pennsylvania to Indiana, workers are bracing for a future that seemed unthinkable just a few months ago. Production lines are being halted, sites are being downsized, and thousands of positions are being eliminated. According to the report at hand, at least 12,000 jobs are to be cut, while key production areas are being moved to Mexico, Eastern Europe, and Southeast Asia. The reason isn't a lack of orders or outdated machinery. Turbines, generators, and engines require massive amounts of steel and aluminum. But due to rising tariffs, the costs of these materials have spiked drastically. For GE, producing in America suddenly no longer means growth, but losses. Behind every job cut is a family, a mortgage, and the fear of a downward spiral. When a GE plant closes, an entire town loses its economic center. Businesses lose customers, schools lose tax revenue, and hospitals have to make cuts. Even more dangerous, however, is that along with the machines, technical knowledge and decades of experience are vanishing abroad. If even General Electric leaves the country that made it great, this isn't just a standard corporate restructuring. It's an alarm bell. Because the next industrial giant is already fighting for survival. 2. General Motors. When Detroit suddenly falls silent, for decades, General Motors was considered the beating heart of the American auto industry. The plants ran day and night, thousands of vehicles left the halls every week, and entire families built their futures on a steady GM salary. Today, however, an eerie silence hangs over places like the Detroit Hamtramck plant. Among powered-down machines, only a few half-finished vehicles remain, while workers don't know if their shift will ever return. Officially, the company refers to a partial production pause, but behind this harmless term lies a much harsher reality. Missing components, rising raw material prices, and nearly unsustainable operating costs are forcing GM to halt more and more lines. A single vehicle now costs nearly 30% more to produce than it did just 2 years ago. The consequences don't just affect Detroit. Seat manufacturers in Tennessee, metal foundries in Ohio, and rail companies in Illinois are losing orders. Shops are closing, schools are cutting budgets, and families are forced to pinch every penny. GM has automated, restructured labor, and cut unprofitable divisions. But nothing seems to be enough. If even General Motors can't keep its engine running, it's not just one company facing a crisis. An entire industrial chain is starting to snap, and the next world-renowned automaker has already been caught in this wave. 3. Stellantis, Jeep, and Ram. American icons are starting to wobble. Jeep and Ram stand for freedom, strength, and the rugged American lifestyle. But behind those familiar brand logos, a crisis is unfolding that can no longer be hidden. In Michigan and Indiana, production lines have been halted, shifts have been cut, and hundreds of employees have been sent home. Nobody knows when the machines will start up again. The cause lies deep within the entire production chain. Steel, aluminum, parts, and transport are getting more expensive. At the same time, demand is dropping because many Americans can no longer afford the vehicles. The Ram 1500, once a reliable pickup for tradespeople and families, now costs almost as much as a luxury car. With every assembly line shut down, smaller suppliers also lose their orders. Manufacturers of chassis, transmissions, and engine parts are having to lay off staff or close down entirely. One veteran engineer, who had worked for the company for nearly 30 years, received a brief message one morning. The line is being halted indefinitely. The bitterest part is that the people who build these vehicles can hardly afford them themselves. Stellantis calls it a production pause. For the affected families, however, it feels like a surrender. And while Jeep and Ram fight for their future, the foundation of the American steel industry is also starting to crack dangerously. 4. U.S. Steel. The backbone of America begins to break. Hardly any name represents America's industrial strength as much as U.S. Steel. This company's steel is in bridges, skyscrapers, railways, and ships. But now even these massive plants are faltering. Several facilities in Pennsylvania and Indiana have been scaled back because production is causing ever greater losses. Rising tariffs on raw steel, higher energy prices, and expensive coal have driven costs through the roof. The company was left with a brutal choice: continue losing millions or shut down the blast furnaces. What was initially announced as a temporary break has now been going on for months. Modern production lines are gathering dust while experienced steelworkers are forced to take low-paying jobs in warehouses. But with every plant that sits idle, life in the surrounding towns also fades. Restaurants lose their regulars, pharmacies stay empty, and families cut back even on medicine and school activities. U.S. Steel was once a pillar of the American middle class. Today, the corporation has to watch as that very middle class falls apart. When the company that literally built America can no longer sustain its own plants, it's more than just a crisis. It's a sign that the country's industrial foundation is beginning to crumble, and already America's heavy trucks are standing still. 5. Volvo and Mack trucks. When America's supply chain stands still, Mack trucks are no ordinary vehicles. On American roads, they haul construction materials, food, and goods that entire cities depend on. But now, even these powerful machines are stalling. In the second quarter of 2025, the Volvo Group reduced U.S. production of Mack trucks by more than 30%. Thousands of vehicles weren't even built. The tariffs on hot-rolled steel and aluminum have significantly increased material costs. The cab and chassis alone are said to have become about $4,000 more expensive. Plants in Pennsylvania and Virginia have had to cut production to a single shift. Night shifts vanished, working hours were slashed, and experienced professionals left the industry. But the crisis doesn't end at the factory gate. When fewer trucks are built, they are missing in construction, freight transport, and the delivery of essential goods. Shipments are delayed, companies have to switch to foreign providers, and the entire supply chain loses stability. An idle Mack plant therefore means much more than lost jobs. It means delayed groceries, stalled construction projects, and growing costs for millions of consumers. When America's trucks stop rolling, the economy starts to slow down. But while the transport sector struggles, another key industry is already on the verge of a standstill. 6. Alcoa. America's aluminum industry is losing its strength. Aluminum is in planes, cars, machinery, and countless everyday products. But of all things, this key industry is now under massive pressure. In Alcoa's plants in southern Indiana and Tennessee, massive conveyor systems are at a standstill, while hundreds of employees are only allowed to work on a rotating basis. The production of aluminum requires enormous amounts of electricity. According to the report at hand, energy costs have doubled in just 14 months. At the same time, critical bauxite shipments from South America have been interrupted. This means two pillars of production are failing simultaneously: affordable energy and reliable raw materials. For the surrounding communities, the consequences are devastating. Towns lose tax revenue, planned construction projects are canceled, schools cut staff, and hospitals reduce shifts. But the greatest loss cannot be measured in dollars. When an aluminum plant closes, decades of experience and highly specialized skills disappear with it, skills that cannot be rebuilt in just a few months. Alcoa is therefore not just fighting for individual factories. It's about the question of whether America is losing a crucial part of its industrial independence. And while the smelting pots cool down, even a company whose products protect millions of people from extreme heat is coming under pressure. 7. Carrier. Even America's air conditioners are breaking a sweat. For decades, Carrier has stood for comfort, safety, and protection from extreme heat. In hospitals, homes, and businesses, the group's air conditioning systems ensure that even the hottest summers remain bearable. But now this very well-known manufacturer is being hit by a wave of costs that is increasingly slowing down its production. In the Indiana plant, the prices for copper, aluminum, and stainless steel have risen sharply. According to the report, production costs have nearly tripled in less than 2 years. At the same time, high fuel prices and growing transport costs are making even domestic deliveries within the USA more expensive. For Carrier, this is particularly dangerous because the business depends on a few hot months. If production, sales, and delivery stall during this exact time, a single week season can cause heavy losses. Cheaper imported products are adding to the pressure. As a result, lines are slowed down, shifts are shortened, and seasonal contracts are canceled. Where heavy metal presses used to operate, there is now a standstill. For many families, this doesn't just mean less income, but the fear of losing their entire future. The cool air for which Carrier became famous has thus turned into a cold wind of uncertainty. And after 7 world-renowned industries, only one question remains. Who will be next to fall? General Electric, General Motors, Jeep, Ram, US. Steel, Mack Trucks, Alcoa, and Carrier represent different sectors. But behind their problems lies the same dangerous development. Raw materials are becoming more expensive, supply chains are under pressure, and production in the USA is increasingly losing its competitiveness. When a plant closes, it's not just machinery and jobs that vanish. Families lose their security, small businesses lose their customers, and entire towns lose their primary source of income. At the same time, technical knowledge, production capacity, and decades of experience are moving abroad. What is called a temporary production pause today could become a permanent industrial retreat tomorrow. The crucial question is no longer whether more companies will be affected, but which one will fall next. Because if even the biggest names in American industry can no longer hold on to their plants, no one in the supply chain is truly safe. Do you believe this development can still be stopped? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you want to see more analyses on the changes in America's economy, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications.